Hello there, this is Kerwin with Travel Talk, and welcome. So today we're going to be talking about standby travel. Let's go. Standby travel. What is standby travel? So standby travel is typically what it says. That means that you don't have, excuse me, you don't have a confirmed seat. That means you don't have a seat assignment on the flight that you're trying to get on, and you are standing by. So you are waiting to see if you're going to get a seat. Now, there are different types of standby travel. There is revenue and non-revenue. So let's talk about revenue traveler first. So a revenue traveler is someone who's bought a ticket from the airline, and they basically given the airline money. So they're generating money, i.e. revenue for the airline. The other one is standby, non-revenue travel, which means that you didn't buy a ticket, so you're traveling not necessarily for free, but you probably traveling at a discounted amount. Sometimes it's free, sometimes it's discounted. So that's the difference between non-revenue and revenue standby travel at the top, right? But let's break it down a little bit. If you're a non-revenue standby customer, you go below the last revenue standby customers because you're not generating any money for the airline, right? And so if you have person A, person B, person A paid $100 for their ticket, person B didn't pay for the ticket because they're an airline employee or a contractor for the airline or somebody who's traveling on airline business or something like that, then the person A would need to go first because they paid for a ticket, right? And now there's a lot of rules behind this. So let's look at the revenue standby rules, for example. It gets a little complex now because you have what's called basic economy tickets. And because you have basic economy tickets, some of the rules says you don't get a ticket until you get to the airport, or worse yet, until you get to the gate. So what you'll see when you look at some of these standby lists, you see all these people on the list, and the list will say, well, we have 20 open seats, and then you see like 30 people on the list. And you're like, well, if they only have 20 open seats and there's only 30 people on the list, 10 people may not get a seat. But there's also something called no-show. And a no-show is when you have a seat on the plane, you have a ticket on the plane. Well, I shouldn't say necessarily a seat, you have a ticket. You bought a ticket on the airplane and you didn't show up for it. And so because you didn't show up for whatever reason, you are classified as a no-show for that particular flight. Now, this is what some airlines use to do what's called revenue management. And revenue management is where they determine how many people are going to show up for this particular flight and how much should I book it more than the number of seats that are available. So the airplane holds 100 people, I can book it to 110. But if it's a 6 a.m. flight, I can book it to 120. But maybe if it's a midday flight, I can book it to 130 because a different amount of people may or may not show up. This is a whole big science that American Airlines came up with, and a lot of airlines use this today to manage the revenue on their particular flight. So back to standby travel. It's all connected. So with the standby travel, you bought a basic economy ticket, and when you get to the airport, at the gate is when they give you a seat. So you'll hear people say, hey, passenger so-and-so, could you please approach a podium? And when they approach the podium, they give you a seat. And then on the standby list, you will see that that person has a seat, or you have a seat, or you'll see a little checkbox next to it. But there's something to tell you that you got a seat on the flight. Now, if you're non-revenue, after those people have been seated, and if they have any seats left over, that's when you get a seat. But you get a seat, there's a certain order, typically seniority. So if you work for the airlines, you get seats first. If you work for another airline, then you get seat. If you're a vendor, you probably get a seat before everybody else because vendor is pretty close to revenue standby passenger. Not the same, but they're pretty close to it. There's also travel agents in there too, but then travel agents would normally, I think they would normally go under revenue because they've actually bought a ticket, although it's a discounted ticket. It gets very complex. So The thing that will normally affects everyone is when you have a standby ticket, when you have a regular ticket, you can do what they call same day standby travel. That means if you're leaving on, let's say, the 4 o'clock flight and you want to leave on the 5 a.m. flight, when you're checking in, you can say, change my flight. The airline will, they'll tell you how much will it cost for you to change your flight, or it might be free. So they'll say, yep, you can change for this, there's no charge, or you can change to this one. There is no charge, but there is no confirmed seat, so they're going to put you on standby. Now, you never lose the space that you have on your original flight unless you get cleared for the flight for which you're standing by. Example, if you're on the 5 o'clock flight and you want to get on the 4 a.m. flight or the 5 a.m. flight, what happens is that you will get a seat on the, if you get a seat on the 5 a.m. flight, they will take you off the 5 p.m. flight because you're not there, right? But if you're still standing by for the 5 a.m. flight and you don't make it, you don't lose your 5 p.m. flight. You still have that seat on there. Then what some airlines also do is that they will put you on the standby list for every flight of the day until it gets to the flight that you're going to be on. So it varies by airline and by company, and also who and date of travel. Some airlines do charge a fee, so you have to pay a fee if you want to do a standby on that same day of travel. Sometimes it's $75. They might have changed this now because of COVID, but just check if the ticket, and sometimes the ticket you buy does not allow you to stand by for an earlier flight. So typically the basic economy ticket, they will tell you when you're buying it that these are the rules of your ticket, and one of them is you cannot stand by for an earlier flight. So if you think you're going to want to stand by for an earlier flight, then you might pay whatever the difference is between the basic economy fare and the next fare that allows you to stand by for a particular flight. So when you hear people say, I'm going to go stand by for a flight, it varies. Some airlines will be like, nope, we don't allow standbys for other flights. I've been on flights before where I got to the airport, I happened to be there 8 hours before, not because the flight was cheaper or anything else, but that's the flight I connected with. And I think the earlier flight was full, so I couldn't get on it, but I wanted to. And so I went and I asked them to change it, and they said no. And I was like, but I'm going to be here for 8 hours. Why can't you just let me go? And they said no. And so I just hung out in the lounge for 8 hours because I didn't want to go into the city. I didn't feel like that. And this was in Istanbul. And so, and I think the fare I had allowed me to stand by. Now, one thing too is that sometimes you may have to pay to stand by for another flight. So again, we go back to the 5 p.m., 5 a.m. example. Sometimes they will tell you that, okay, it's going to cost you $100 to stand by. However, though, if you are a frequent flyer with higher status, you usually have you don't have to pay. So it just depends on the rules of the ticket, whether you're a frequent flyer or not. And this is why it helps and it pays to be loyal to the travel brand. I know not every time it pays to be loyal, especially these days with all the frequent flyer changes, but getting on an earlier flight is actually one of the good reasons to be loyal to an airline. So I hope that helps explain what is a standby flight, what's the difference between whether you're in a revenue or a non-revenue or something like that. So if you have any more questions about, what's a standby flight, how to make a standby flight, where do standby flights go? Well, they go where everybody else goes. But leave a message below and I'll be more than happy to answer it. This is Kerwin with Travel Talk. Have a great trip. Talk to you soon.